Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. The case of Sheila LaBarre, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila LaBarre. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBarre was a born monster, or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBarre? Sheila LaBarre was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this. Charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood. First marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LaBarre, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months, and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the madwoman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LeBar. The man had previously been married twice, and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago, and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon LeBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion, who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself LeBar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that, From now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila, for the first time, didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over, another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LeBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted, House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger, and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, La Bar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire, and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, La Bar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLorge. He was in a difficult life situation, and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again, but Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon, Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors, who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled, and even frightened by the guy's appearance, that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange, and were made of improvised materials. A mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings, but that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael DeLog, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. New Year's Eve turned into a nightmare. According to statistics, the nature of a crime largely depends on the time of day it is committed. For example, during the day, economic crimes, robberies, thefts, frauds, etc. are more common. In the evening, domestic violence incidents occur more frequently. But at night, when the streets are dark and nearly deserted, and it's hard to spot a criminal, the time comes for crime and the most brutal acts of evil. Everyone knows that walking alone on city streets at night is unsafe, especially for women. However, sometimes circumstances make it unavoidable. The story of a young British woman named Rachel Moran began this way. On New Year's Eve, she needed to return home from her parents' place where she had been visiting. The distance was only about 1 mile along a route she walked daily. Yet this time, Rachel never made it home, disappearing about 150 feet from her destination. She was searched for a whole month, with hopes that the missing girl might still be alive. But the truth that eventually emerged shocked all of Ireland. Who was Rachel Moran? Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in Englishcall, on the island of Ireland. She was the youngest of 4 children in the family of Wanda and Ray Moran. She grew up with 2 older sisters and a brother, with whom she was always very close. From a young age, Rachel absolutely loved dancing. Her parents, noticing this passion, enrolled her in a ballet studio, which she attended for many years. She even planned to connect her future with this field, either as a ballerina or a choreographer. However, as she grew older, her views and preferences began to change. Rachel was an excellent student, gravitating toward the exact sciences, and after finishing school, she entered a prestigious college to study management information systems. After studying for about 2 years, Rachel realized she had made a mistake in choosing her profession, as her creative nature took over. She decided to return to choreography and pursue higher education part-time. During this period, she met a young man named Mark, who was only a year older than her. They quickly bonded, forming a friendship that soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. About 6 months after they met, the couple decided to live together and rented a small apartment in a new cozy residential complex located just 1 mile from Rachel's parents' house. So she visited them almost every day. In the fall of 2002, Rachel started working at a local bakery, where she specialized in decorating confectionery. She fell in love with this work and seriously considered getting a second degree in culinary arts. It's worth noting that Rachel always cooked well, and it was one of her hobbies. Also, in 2002, Mark and Rachel adopted 2 cats from a local animal shelter, whom they adored and treated almost like children. The young couple tried not to leave the pets alone at home for long, fed them on schedule, and cared for them in every possible way. A New Year's Eve argument. As the celebration of the New Year 2003 approached, everyone around was busy preparing for the festivities, buying gifts for their loved ones, and choosing recipes for the holiday table. Rachel had a lot of orders at work, and she was doing her best to keep up. For the holidays, she and Mark planned to visit both their parents, but wanted to do so without leaving their cats alone at home all night, especially since one of the pets was unwell and needed special care. The couple had previously agreed on how and where they would celebrate the new year. They intended to spend some time together at home first. Then Mark planned to visit his parents, but after midnight, he was supposed to return to the apartment he shared with Rachel. Rachel, meanwhile, arranged to meet her brother at a bar, but wanted to stop by her parents' house before midnight and stay there until morning. The first part of the evening went according to plan. The couple had a romantic dinner at home, drank a glass of champagne, after which Mark left to visit his parents, and Rachel's brother picked her up. Rachel spent time with her brother at the bar until around 11 p.m., after which they went together to her parents' home, where they were greeted by her father, mother, and sister, who were waiting for them at the festive table. Around 1 a.m., Rachel called her boyfriend on their home phone, but he didn't answer. After a few more unsuccessful attempts, she dialed his mobile number. When Mark answered, she asked where he was and if he had returned home, as they had agreed. Mark admitted that a close friend had invited him to a party, and he simply couldn't say no. Rachel was furious, as they had discussed that someone should be at home at night to look after the animals, one of which was not feeling well, and they agreed not to leave them alone until morning. After a brief verbal altercation, Mark said he would return by 6 a.m., insisting that nothing serious would happen in those few hours. But Rachel was beside herself with anger, insisting that someone had to stay with the animals. However, her boyfriend stood his ground, and the conversation ended in a heated argument. Upset and angry, Rachel began preparing to leave for home, even though it was already well past midnight, and walking alone on the street seemed unsafe. Her mother, hearing her daughter arguing on the phone with her boyfriend and realizing that she was planning to leave, tried to talk her out of it. Wanda urged her daughter to wait until morning, assuring her that nothing bad would happen to the animals in such a short period. But Rachel was adamant, and was already getting dressed. Her mother was very worried about her and didn't want to let her go. They started arguing loudly and continued even when Rachel was already standing at the open door. Nevertheless, her mother could not convince her. By that time, Rachel's father and brother were already quite drunk, and had gone to bed, so no one could accompany her. Around 1:30 a.m., she left her parents' house, and no one ever saw her alive again, vanished into the darkness. Rachel promised her mother that she would call as soon as she got home. The journey should have taken no more than 15 minutes, but an hour and a half passed, and her daughter still hadn't called. The worried mother began calling her, but no one answered either the home or mobile numbers. Near dawn, Mrs. Moran finally fell asleep on the living room couch with the phone in her hand. She woke up around 9:30 a.m. on January 1st, and heard her husband talking to someone on the phone. The word daughter was mentioned, so she assumed he was speaking to Rachel. However, as soon as he hung up, he said it was their eldest daughter who had been trying to reach her sister all morning, and was starting to worry. After hearing this, panic gripped the mother. She tried to call Rachel again, but her mobile was off, and when she called the home phone, a sleepy Mark answered, not understanding what was happening. It turned out that when Mark returned home after the party at 7 a.m. and didn't find his girlfriend there, he assumed she had stayed with her parents and simply went to bed. Mark was very surprised when he learned that Rachel had set out for their apartment during the night, but never arrived. He had no idea where she could be, but he was certain she hadn't been home, as she would have fed the animals first. However, the bowls were empty, and the cats were clearly hungry. The bed in their bedroom was made, and there was no sign that anyone had entered the apartment after they had left it together the previous evening. Rachel's parents, as well as her boyfriend, began calling all their friends, close ones, and acquaintances, asking if they had seen Rachel or had any contact with her. But all efforts were in vain. The Morin family reported her missing to the police that same day, and despite Rachel being 21 years old, the authorities did not wait the usual 24 hours before launching an immediate search. The police inspected Rachel's apartment, as well as her parents' home where she was last seen, and spoke with all the relatives, friends, and Mark, completely ruling out the possibility that she had run away on her own. It should be added that the missing woman had a striking and attractive appearance. She was tall, slim, with beautiful facial features, and long platinum blonde hair. Seeing someone like her on the street, passers-by would undoubtedly remember her, so detectives began searching for possible witnesses. Stranger in the dark in 2002. Tracking a location by a mobile signal was not yet possible, and call and message logs from the girl's phone provided no leads. All that could be determined was that the device was turned off approximately 15 minutes after Rachel left her parents' house, and judging by the time, she should have been near her own home by then. During another conversation with law enforcement, Rachel's mother suddenly recalled an important detail she hadn't mentioned earlier. It turns out that as her daughter was already outside, they continued arguing loudly at the door. Wanda didn't want to let her go, urging her to wait until morning, and at that moment, she noticed a man walking down the street, past their house. The woman even thought about asking him to accompany Rachel home, but she didn't. Wanda couldn't get a clear look at the stranger in the dim light. She only saw a silhouette in a dark jacket and hat, so she couldn't even give a rough description. However, this person could be a valuable witness or a criminal. He needed to be found as soon as possible, so the authorities asked all local residents, as well as shop owners, to provide any surveillance camera footage if they had any. Detectives managed to establish that the unknown man walked past the store located about 400 feet from Rachel's parents' house, and about a minute later, the missing girl also walked past the same store. The man's face or any other identifying features couldn't be made out due to the poor quality of the recording, but it became clear that Rachel had covered about half of her route home. The search continued, and the detectives decided to use a tactic that often helped in missing person investigations. They found a girl who closely resembled Rachel, dressed her in clothing identical to what Rachel was wearing on the night she disappeared, and asked her to walk the same route at night. All of this was filmed, and then the footage of the blonde walking down the street at night was shown on the news, with a request for anyone who had seen her on New Year's Eve to come forward. The plan worked, and several people reported seeing a lone girl walking, as well as a dark male silhouette. However, one witness who was smoking on a balcony saw the man pass by first, followed by the blonde. Another witness, living near the residential complex where Rachel's apartment was, claimed that the girl passed by first, followed a few feet behind by the man. This suggested that the stranger either fell behind, or that it was a different person altogether. 10 days into the search, another camera was discovered along the girl's route, located about 150 feet from her home. The footage showed Rachel walking by, followed closely by a man. There was little doubt that it was the same man, as he had a similar build and was wearing identical clothing. It appeared that, at some point, the man let the girl walk ahead of him, and then began following her. Disturbing clues. The large-scale search for the missing girl began within the first few days of her disappearance. Detectives marked a 10-mile search radius and involved helicopters, divers, search dogs, and hundreds of volunteers. They combed through streets, wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water. The search was conducted on the ground and from the air, with small streams and artificial canals being drained for thorough inspection. But time passed and there were no results. Since her disappearance, Rachel hadn't used her mobile phone or made any transactions with her bank card, leading authorities to suspect that she was likely no longer alive. However, her relatives held out hope of finding her alive and well. 2 weeks later, a sneaker was found in a drainage ditch near Rachel's home, which her family recognized. According to her mother, Rachel was wearing that pair of shoes on the day she disappeared. A few days later, in one of the drain streams, officers found a black handbag containing a mobile phone, a makeup bag, a wallet with bank cards, and an ID card in the name of Rachel Moran. All the evidence was found within a mile of Rachel's home, leading the police to theorize that the possible criminal might live nearby. If this theory was correct, then he likely also hid the body in this area. This led to the development of a plan to conduct a door-to-door search of all residents within a 2-mile radius of Rachel's home. Naturally, this required significant time and resources, so more officers were brought in, each working with a partner to minimize risks. Grim discovery in the trash chute. Nearly a month had passed since the young woman disappeared. The door-to-door search of neighborhood residents was progressing slowly, as it was difficult to find homeowners at home. And on top of that, the police needed permission to enter the premises, which also took time. On January 28th, on Nash Court, a police officer and his assistant entered another house and were immediately met with a foul odor. The homeowner, a 23-year-old named Michael Little, assured them that there was nothing to worry about, claiming that the plumbing was clogged and he was waiting for a plumber. Visiting him at the time was his friend, Marcus, who didn't understand what the police were searching for and merely observed their actions. Nothing suspicious was found in the house, but the nauseating smell persisted, raising the officers' suspicions. The source of the odor turned out to be not the bathroom, but a narrow trash chute, which was clogged with bags of various debris. The officers decided to take a closer look at its contents, and after removing several bags, they discovered a human leg sticking out. The police immediately called for backup and arrested both the homeowner and his guest. Michael remained completely calm and even detached throughout the process, while his friend had a full-blown breakdown upon seeing the deceased girl. The body was extracted from the narrow trash chute with great difficulty, and it was unclear how it had been placed there at all. The victim was almost completely unclothed, and due to the advanced state of decomposition, determining the cause of death immediately was impossible. However, numerous stab wounds were clearly visible on the corpse. The suspect's story. Little immediately claimed that he was relieved the body had been found, as the smell had been driving him crazy. He also shared his version of events from that fateful night, but it sounded highly unconvincing. According to him, while walking down the street, he overheard the argument between the mother and daughter, from which he gathered that the girl was planning to go somewhere alone. He followed her, struck up a conversation, and they became acquainted. When they reached Michael's house, he allegedly invited her in, and Rachel agreed. According to Little, they drank a little, chatted, and then engaged in intimate relations by mutual consent, after which he fell asleep. The suspect claimed that he woke up around 5 in the morning and saw the girl in the kitchen acting irrationally. On the table lay a small bag of prohibited substances belonging to him, and he assumed that his guest had tried something from it. Then, according to him, she grabbed a knife and attacked him, but he managed to knock the weapon out of her hands and delivered several blows that turned out to be fatal. Michael attributed the entire incident to an unfortunate accident in the process of self-defense. Naturally, everyone who knew the deceased girl disagreed with this version. First of all, Rachel would never have spoken to a stranger on a deserted street at night, let alone gone anywhere with him. Secondly, she would never have cheated on her boyfriend. And thirdly, she had never used any prohibited substances in her life. The autopsy revealed that the girl had been subjected to intimate violence, as evidenced by the characteristic internal injuries and traces of Little's seminal fluid were found inside her. Moreover, the victim's body had 27 stab wounds, which did not look like self-defense, and a third of them were inflicted from behind. Who is Michael Little? After the suspect's arrest, law enforcement reviewed his background and discovered that this young man already had an extensive criminal record. He grew up in a troubled family and had been caught stealing multiple times while still in school. Incidentally, he never finished school, and as a result, due to the lack of basic education, He couldn't find even a somewhat decent job, lived on benefits and also on what he obtained illegally. He had been arrested several times for possession and distribution of prohibited substances. Acquaintances described Little as a pathological liar. He constantly boasted about his intimate exploits and the impressive number of lovers, though in reality, all the girls tried to avoid this strange and aggressive guy. Recently, however, Michael had been increasingly telling stories about a tall blonde he was allegedly dating, though no one had ever seen her with him. Law enforcement speculated that the suspect might have previously seen the victim, since they lived in the same neighborhood, with their homes just a few hundred feet apart. It's likely that he developed an interest in the girl and began fantasizing, telling his friends about her. On that fateful night, seeing her alone on the street, the criminal decided to seize the opportunity and attack her. However, the victim and her assailant had not been acquainted before. A new, even stranger version as the investigation continued. The suspect unexpectedly retracted his initial statements and presented an entirely different version, claiming that his friend Marcus, who was arrested along with him, was the real criminal. Allegedly, Marcus was the one who met the girl on the street that night and brought her to his house. They drank together and then the guest began showing interest in the homeowner, leading them to retreat to his bedroom. After the intimate encounter, according to the accused, an enraged Marcus burst into the room, furious that Rachel had chosen someone else over him. He attacked the girl with a knife, ending her life, and then threatened Michael with violence, demanding that he help hide the body and remain silent about what had happened. Naturally, no one believed the story, although the accused and his lawyer insisted that this was exactly how things had unfolded. However, no evidence linked Marcus to the crime. He had an alibi for New Year's Eve, and his reaction when the body was discovered indicated that he had no idea about the nightmare that had occurred in his friend's house. Trial and sentence. Michael never admitted his guilt, so the exact sequence of events from that fateful night could only be partially reconstructed. It was determined that on December 31st, 2002, Little attended a party and was preparing to celebrate the new year with friends. At the party, he tried to flirt with one girl but was rudely rejected, and then with another but with the same result. Angry and intoxicated, Michael left the event and headed home, where he happened to cross paths with Rachel, upon whom he unleashed all his pent-up rage. He overheard the girl arguing with her mother and decided to follow her. At some point, the criminal turned off the road into a dark alley and waited for his victim to pass by, then followed her. As they walked past Michael's house, he attacked Rachel, stabbing her several times in the back. It's likely that he then dragged the unfortunate girl into his home, where he took advantage of her, then finished her off with the same knife and hid her body in the trash chute. In October 2003, Little was found guilty of assaulting and taking the life of Rachel Moran. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 35 years. Jenna Burley's case was at a friend's birthday party, found in a plastic container outside of town. It's difficult to judge a stranger's intentions based solely on their appearance or conversation. Sometimes, a stranger may seem perfectly presentable, behave politely, and act at first glance, out of the best intentions, offering help. However, in reality, it's often precisely these individuals who lull their chosen victim into a false sense of security, luring them to a deserted place to rob, kidnap, take advantage of, or end their life. Unfortunately, the victim often realizes too late that they've fallen into a deadly trap. The story of an ordinary American student and popular blogger named Jenna Burley in 2017 shocked the entire country. Initially, thousands of people participated in the search for the missing girl, hoping she was alive. But when the terrifying truth was revealed, no one could believe what had happened. The girl had simply gone to celebrate her friend's birthday, but this party turned out to be the last night of her life. A tragic mix-up, intoxication, and the naive desire to trust a charming stranger who, coincidentally, offered his help, led to the tragedy. Who was Jenna Burley? Jenna Nicole Burley was born on November 4, 1994, in the capital of Pennsylvania, the city of Harrisburg. As the second of 4 children to Edward and Jacqueline Burley, her parents met in the late 80s while attending university in Philadelphia, where mutual feelings quickly blossomed, and they never parted after that. The couple married in the fall of 1991, and in 1992 their first child was born, a daughter named Janelle. 2 years later, the heroine of our story was born, and soon after, their sons, Jeffrey and Jacob, followed one after the other. The Burleys dedicated themselves to helping others. Jacqueline worked in a nursing home, and Edward was employed at a hospital, specializing in patient rehabilitation after injuries and illnesses. The couple raised their children in an atmosphere of love and mutual understanding, striving to give them the best. Jenna was always very close to her parents, as well as her brothers and sister. She grew up as an active, positive, and energetic girl with creative streak, strong charisma, and leadership qualities. She always had plenty of friends, performed well in school, acted in the school theater from a young age, and adored animals. The Burley family was neither wealthy nor struggling. They settled in Philadelphia, in a spacious house located in the quiet, cozy neighborhood of Harleysville. Jenna easily integrated into any group, quickly made friends, and became the life of the party. In high school, the girl dreamed of becoming a fashion designer, constantly experimenting with looks and styles, sometimes appearing quite extravagant. Jenna wore bright makeup, dyed her hair in various colors, and dressed in different styles, sometimes resembling a hippie, other times an adherent of the emo subculture. She loved standing out from the crowd, and encouraged her friends to challenge the mundane routine as well. The teenage girl frequently attended concerts, festivals, and other mass events that served as sources of inspiration for her. As she neared the end of high school, Burley's views and interests began to shift. Now, she dreamed of a career in film rather than fashion design. She learned to create short films during classes at a local film studio, where her talent was already evident, as she approached each storyline and creation process with creativity. At that time, Jenna also registered on several social networks, where she actively maintained her pages, sharing her life, interests, and philosophical reflections on various pressing social issues. Very quickly, the high school senior gained a large following, and her audience grew rapidly. People seemed to enjoy following this vibrant, creative girl, who constantly experimented with her appearance and encouraged others to embrace self-expression. Before she knew it, Jenna had become a rather popular blogger with an audience of several thousand followers. In 2013, the 18-year-old high school graduate enrolled in a prestigious college in sunny Florida, where she studied media arts and filmmaking. While studying, the student continued to actively maintain and develop her blog, sharing stories about campus life, the subject she was studying, her community involvement, as well as parties and other entertainment with friends. Serious injury and prolonged depression on December 20, 2013. After completing just one semester of college, Jenna came home to celebrate Christmas with her family. At that time, Philadelphia had already seen snow, and the weather was quite harsh. Jenna didn't consider the sharp contrast from Florida and wore completely inappropriate shoes, which caused her to slip and fall, seriously injuring her ankle before even reaching the house. An X-ray revealed a double fracture with displacement, requiring surgery, along with the insertion of special pins and plates. For several months, Burley was literally confined to a wheelchair, as she couldn't put any weight on her foot. She then had to relearn how to walk and attended daily physiotherapy sessions. During this period, she also managed to catch pneumonia, significantly complicating and prolonging her recovery. The student was forced to take an academic leave to focus on restoring her health, which greatly upset her. The only solace she found was in her personal blog, where she published excerpts from her journal entries and thoughts, and in social media, where Jenna actively communicated with her followers. Jenna posted new videos almost daily, answering questions and discussing various topics. A passionate animal rights activist, she spoke out against zoos, dolphinariums, and other places where animals are kept in captivity and exploited for entertainment. She also highlighted the difficult plight of the homeless, noting that in states with warm and mild climates, they have it much easier than in Pennsylvania, where those without a roof over their heads risk freezing to death on the streets. In addition, Jenna, who had already been engaged in regular charity work, began organizing fundraising efforts to donate essential items to animal shelters and homeless shelters. During her rehabilitation, Jenna took up making handmade jewelry, which she sold online, donating all the proceeds to those in need. She actively encouraged her followers to donate unwanted items to charity, emphasizing that what might seem like trash, cluttering a closet to some, could be a real treasure for someone less fortunate. The recovery period dragged on, and Jenna ended up spending almost a year at home instead of just a few months. During this time, she adopted a dog from a local shelter, whom she absolutely adored, and she mentioned her pet daily in her blog, sharing stories of how they spent their days together. But despite her seemingly optimistic outlook, Jenna fell into a deep depression. In the fall of 2014, she candidly admitted that she could no longer cope on her own and had to seek professional help from a psychiatrist. Burley spoke openly about the mental health challenges she faced, sharing her doctor's recommendations and discussing how her family and pet supported her. The blogger's audience grew several times during this period, as many young people related to the struggles she described and thanked her for her honesty. In early 2015, Jenna, along with her father and younger brother Jacob, went on a trip to sunny California. Jenna felt much better, as she wrote in her social media posts, and the happy photos from the ocean shore clearly showed the strong bond she had with her family. The eternal student. After fully recovering and taking the trip with her family, Jenna decided not to return to Florida. Instead transferred to a school in her hometown, choosing to live at her parents' house. She enrolled at Montgomery County Community College, a suburb of Philadelphia. Meanwhile, Burley continued to maintain her blog and produced short videos on various topics. In 2017, after earning a bachelor's degree in the humanities, Jenna decided to enroll in a university and became a student at Temple University's School of Film. Since the campus was only a half-hour drive away, Jenna chose not to move into a dormitory, but to stay at her family home. By that time, she had renovated her room and acquired her own car, so she didn't need to rely on family members for rides to class. At the time she entered the university, Jenna was already 22 years old, making her 4 to 5 years older than her classmates. Nevertheless, they were on the same wavelength, hanging out, having fun, attending concerts, and celebrating each other's birthdays. It's worth noting that Temple University is located almost in the center of the city and is one of the largest higher education institutions in the country. The campus is surrounded by numerous shops, shopping centers, restaurants, pubs, and other venues, so life here is bustling, you could say, 24/7. Students always have a place to relax and unwind after classes. Classes began at the end of August, and just a few days later, Jenna got into a car accident on her way to school. Fortunately, she was wearing her seatbelt and wasn't injured, but her car was seriously damaged. From then on, her father or one of her younger brothers usually drove her to school in the mornings. Occasionally, Jenna would stay overnight at friends' houses if she stayed in the city late, always informing her parents beforehand. Fatal mix-up at the party on Wednesday, August 30th, 2017, Jenna's classmate and close friend, named Davis, was planning to celebrate his birthday at one of the bars. Jenna was among those invited to the party and was supposed to stay overnight at the birthday boy's place so they could head to class together on Thursday morning. She informed her parents in advance so they wouldn't worry. That evening, Jenna, Davis, and 5 other friends had a great time, taking photos and posting them on social media. They hopped from bar to bar, meeting other friends along the way who joined their group, congratulating the birthday boy and toasting to his health. By around 11 p.m., the group had changed significantly, and everyone was pretty tipsy. Around midnight, the friends found themselves in a small sports bar that was packed with people. The birthday boy had stepped away because his friends had arranged a surprise for him, kidnapping him and taking him to another venue. He informed Burley about this and asked her to text him what time she would arrive at his apartment to spend the night. Jenna stayed in the bar with the rest of the group. Several people who were sober and driving offered Jenna a ride wherever she wanted to go, and a few classmates invited her to stay over at their place. But Jenna said she had already made plans with Davis and would go to his place. However, by around 1 a.m., friends began to leave, and Burley didn't notice that everyone who had offered her a place to stay or a ride had simply disappeared. A mix-up occurred, leading to tragic consequences. Jenna believed until the last moment that she would leave with someone from the bar, and she said goodbye to her friends, assuring them that she would stay a little longer. When she finally realized what was happening, she was sitting at the bar next to a group of strangers who soon left as well. The bar was closing at 2 a.m., and Jenna, realizing she was all alone, started texting Davis, asking him to come pick her up. However, the guy had fallen asleep at home, and his phone was in another room, so he didn't hear anything. Jenna tried to contact a few other friends, but they were either too drunk to respond or didn't hear their phones. She didn't want to bother her parents, and walking through the city alone at night didn't seem safe. The disappearance of the student when Davis woke up in the morning, he thought Jenna had stayed over at someone else's place, but after checking his phone, he became seriously concerned. Jenna had tried to call him twice, and sent several messages asking if he could pick her up from the bar, with the last message containing only 2 words, "Help me." He tried to call her back, but her phone was turned off. He still hoped that his friend was okay and would show up at class as usual, but Burley never appeared at the university. Davis called and visited all the friends who had partied with them at the bar the night before, but none of them had hosted the student. In the afternoon, one of Jenna's friends called her parents to ask if she had returned home. When they responded no, she explained what had happened, and within half an hour, Edward and Jacqueline rushed to the campus. They spoke with their daughter's friends, trying to find out who had seen her last and where. After getting no useful information, the Burleys immediately went to the police to report their daughter missing, insisting on an immediate search operation. The urgency of the situation was heightened by the messages asking for help that Jenna had sent to several classmates. The first places checked were the academic buildings and dormitories, but there was no sign of the missing student. The police then contacted local hospitals, but no women matching Jenna's description had been admitted in the past 24 hours. Everyone who had interacted with her the previous night confirmed that the last time they saw the student was at the sports bar. She was wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt with a motivational slogan on the front, and a light blue hoodie tied around her waist. Another distinguishing feature was her hairstyle, long black hair braided into 2 pigtails. Since Burley was a fairly popular blogger, news of her disappearance quickly spread across social media. Thousands of her followers posted messages asking for help in finding her and urged anyone with information to come forward. The generous and persistent stranger when the police arrived at the bar where the missing student was last seen. The bartender immediately remembered the girl with the braids who stayed late after everyone else had left. She was quite drunk, seemed confused, and was constantly texting and calling someone. The signal from her phone was last detected in the same neighborhood around 2 a.m. Surveillance footage from the cameras at the entrance and inside the bar was reviewed. The detectives saw Jenna sitting alone at the bar, drinking a cocktail and sending messages. Around 1:30 a.m., a man approached her, started a conversation, and then bought her a drink. They sat together for about 20 minutes before leaving the bar just before it closed. They both appeared to be quite intoxicated as they were walking unsteadily. When the bartender was shown the footage and asked if he knew the man, he immediately recognized a regular customer and even named him Joshua Hupperters. According to the bartender, Joshua was almost a daily visitor, and the night before he seemed particularly interested in the lonely beauty, buying her cocktails and persistently inviting her to his place. The authorities discovered that Joshua had recently turned 29, had once attended Temple University but never graduated, having taken an extended academic leave. Despite this, he constantly hung out with students and lived just 5 minutes away from the bar where he was seen with Jenna. He rented a spacious apartment in a building across the street, which he shared with his friend, Jack Miley. It wasn't until later in the evening that they managed to reach Joshua, who claimed he had been very drunk the night before and didn't remember anything about a girl from the bar. He agreed to come in for questioning, but soon after, his phone was turned off, prompting the police to visit Hupperter's apartment themselves. The main suspect, only Jack, was home, and he let the detectives in without any fuss. The guy's apartment looked like a typical bachelor pad, with disorder reigning in nearly every room. Jack admitted that he and his friend had indeed gone to the sports bar the night before, where they drank heavily. Afterward, Joshua picked up some girl, and Jack decided to head home to give them privacy. Jack claimed he went straight to bed and didn't hear when his roommate came home, or if he was alone. The next day, Joshua suddenly started cleaning the kitchen. He seemed worried, had fresh scratches on his face and a deep cut on his hand. Joshua explained this as an unfortunate accident, saying he had fallen into some bushes while drunk. After lunch, he disappeared, taking some of his belongings with him, without telling his friend where he was going or how long he'd be gone, and his phone was turned off. The large apartment the guys lived in had a second exit leading to the backyard, where there were no surveillance cameras. Near the door, a pair of men's sandals with strange brownish stains were found, and on a dresser lay a roll of paper towels stained with something that looked like blood. There was also a strong smell of cleaning chemicals in the kitchen, and several empty bottles of cleaning products were scattered on the floor. All of this raised alarming suspicions, and from that point on, Joshua was considered the main suspect in the case of the missing student. The police decided to dig deeper into Hupperter's background and discovered that he was born and raised in Philadelphia, lost his father at an early age, who had been violently deprived of life, and this event had been traumatic for the child. Joshua enrolled at Temple University but never graduated, remaining a student until he was 29. He had a history of legal issues related to the distribution of prohibited substances, which he sold to students. Additionally, he had served several months for burglary, and had been charged multiple times for assaults on women in attempts to coerce them into intimacy. The search and first interrogation of the fugitive, it became clear that the suspect could be extremely dangerous, and there was still no information about the fate of the missing girl. The FBI joined the investigation, and soon it was determined that Joshua's phone had last been active in Wayne County, about 230 miles north of Philadelphia, near a lake. It was discovered that the fugitive's grandmother lived in that area, and he might be hiding at her house. Hupperter was indeed apprehended at his maternal grandmother's house. He appeared calm and didn't resist. He maintained that he didn't remember anything about the night of August 31st because he was drunk, and when asked about the fresh wounds on his body, he repeated the same story about falling into bushes that he had told his roommate Jack. He explained his sudden departure as wanting to spend the last weekend before the start of classes with family. When the police pointed out that they knew he wasn't enrolled in any university, he fell silent and demanded a lawyer. Meanwhile, experts working at the fugitive's apartment in Philadelphia found traces of blood on the floor, plumbing, and in the trash can. They were waiting for the test results to determine whose blood it was, and the hope of finding the missing girl alive was fading with each passing minute. During the search of Joshua's room, several bags of various prohibited substances were found, along with about $20,000 in cash. The mysterious container detectives continued to search Hupperter's residence, including the backyard accessible through the second door. In the corner trash bins, which fortunately had not yet been emptied, a black bag was found containing a light blue hoodie and a t-shirt with slogans, along with a sports bra and a black hair tie with a few dark strands of hair. The clothing found in the trash closely resembled what Jenna was wearing on the day she disappeared. To make matters worse, there were bloodstains on the items, making the chances of finding the girl alive seem almost non-existent. Nevertheless, the search continued, and the suspect remained silent. On September 2nd, Hupperter's stepfather unexpectedly called the police, reporting that on August 31st, the man had visited his mother's house in Jenkintown. He had arrived by taxi, carrying a large opaque plastic container that was very heavy. Joshua explained that it contained his books and some personal belongings. He left the container in the garage and left early the next morning, taking another taxi. The stepfather found this suspicious, as the container was unusually heavy and gave off a strange feeling. Knowing his stepson's criminal past, the elderly man decided to inform the police without telling his wife. He didn't know where Joshua went afterward, but heard him asking the driver not to log the trip in the app, promising to pay in cash. The grisly discovery in the shed by the time the stepfather called, Hupperter had already been apprehended, and a search of his grandmother's house had yielded no suspicious findings. The fate of the mysterious plastic container remained unknown, and the authorities suspected it might have been sunk in a lake. They considered involving divers in the search, but the case took an unexpected turn. It turned out that Joshua's grandmother's husband had a small shed located a significant distance from the house, nearly hidden by overgrown bushes and trees. The man stored an old boat and fishing gear there, though he hadn't used them in a long time. On September 3rd, he decided to check the shed and noticed the lock on the door was broken. Suspecting thieves, he entered but found everything in its place, except for a strange container that hadn't been there before. He opened the container and recoiled in horror. Inside was the severely mutilated naked body of a young woman. He immediately called the police to report the gruesome discovery. The authorities quickly realized whose remains the pensioner had found in his shed and called in Burley's parents for identification. Jenna's mother fainted, and her father nearly had a heart attack when their worst fears were confirmed. The crime scene through witness testimony and surveillance footage, investigators established that Hupperters had plied the already intoxicated girl with more alcohol and then lured her to his home. When Jenna realized she was trapped, she managed to send several friends messages asking for help, but none responded. At the apartment, Joshua attacked the girl and tried to force her into intimacy, but she fought back fiercely, scratching the criminal and cutting his hand with a kitchen knife. However, he managed to knock the knife out of her hand and repeatedly slammed her head against the floor. He incapacitated Jenna and took advantage of her before strangling the poor girl with his bare hands. He then placed her body in a container he found in the storage room and cleaned up the crime scene as best he could. The autopsy revealed that Jenna died from mechanical asphyxiation. Her body showed numerous abrasions, bruises, and even bite marks. She also had a traumatic brain injury and signs of intimate assault. The blood found on the shoes and paper towels in the apartment was hers. Her hair was on the hair tie in the trash can, and the blood and semen found on her clothing matched the defendant's. The trial and sentencing Hupperters refused to take a plea deal or admit guilt, even though his culpability was never in doubt. Furthermore, a search of his grandmother's house revealed a backpack containing his documents, cash, and a few essentials indicating that the criminal had intended to flee and was caught just in time. The trial of the criminal and assailant began only in the spring of 2019, a year and a half after the horrific crime. The defense attorneys desperately tried to shift all the blame onto the deceased girl, claiming that she had voluntarily come to Joshua's apartment and provoked him. However, the defense's statements sparked outrage among everyone present. After 9 days of hearings, the defendant was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole only after 60 years. Popular wisdom says, if you want to lose a friend, lend him money. As a rule, when the time comes to repay this debt, there are hundreds of excuses and thousands of reasons not to do it. However, what to do if the amount is impressive and the money was not even borrowed but was given for safekeeping? But by the time it was necessary to return it, almost all the funds were spent. In such cases, it is not uncommon for the debtor to think of the most drastic and cruel ways of dealing with the problem. The case of Taylor Wright in 2017 shook up the quiet and cozy town of Pensacola, which is in the west of the sunny state of Florida, and became the subject of numerous detective documentaries and TV projects. The missing girl was searched for more than a month, but still found. There was no doubt about who took her life from that moment, although the killer, due to the specifics of his work, provided everything to leave no trace. But in an effort to create the illusion that the victim was still alive and had simply left town, one essential detail was missed, and it was this detail that ultimately solved this difficult case. Taylor Wright early years, personal life. Taylor Harper Wright, before marriage Johnson, was born in 1994, April 23rd, in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and was the younger of 2 daughters in the family. She was a restless child from a young age, and parents, in order to direct the energy of the heiress in the right direction, decided to introduce her to sports. The girl was engaged in swimming, athletics, as well as Oriental martial arts, where she achieved considerable success. After graduating from high school, Taylor entered a prestigious college, and then became a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This educational institution is considered the most selective, and accepts less than half of those who apply for admission. However, the girl managed to get the necessary number of points, After receiving a diploma, she joined the police, becoming an officer in his native Jacksonville. In 2003, while still in college, when Taylor was 19 years old, she met a guy named Jeffrey Wright, with whom she had a romantic relationship. The young man was only a couple years older than her. They turned out to have a lot of common interests, so the romance developed rapidly. A year after meeting, the couple decided to move in together and start living together. And 2 years later, the young man made his friend an official marriage proposal, to which she, of course, responded with consent. By 2009, the marriage of Taylor and Jeffrey gave a crack, but the couple naively believed that everything can still be fixed by the birth of a common child, which they have long thought about. So, in 2010, the couple had a son, but contrary to expectations, the situation in the family did not improve, but only heated up even more. Young parents constantly quarreled, and seemed to have completely ceased to find common ground. Nevertheless, their marriage lasted for almost 5 more years. In 2015, Jeffrey filed for divorce, indicating as a reason for adultery on the part of Taylor. She did not object, but the couple faced a long and difficult divorce process, as well as the main issue, custody of their common son, new love and loss of custody of the child. Almost immediately after the breakup with Jeffrey, Taylor took their son and moved to Pensacola, Florida, where she settled with her new passport, Cassandra Waller. Actually, the accusations of her husband in cheating were not unfounded, and Taylor had a romantic relationship on the side back in 2014. By that time, she had already left the service in the ranks of the police and became a private detective, which brought her much more interest. Jeffrey's career was also going uphill, so that financially both parents could provide their son a decent life. Former spouses met exclusively in the courtroom, and all issues were solved only there. Even at the beginning of the divorce process, Taylor withdrew from their common account with her husband about $100,000, so as not to share this money and keep it. Part of the amount she transferred to her sister, part cashed out and gave to her parents, and almost half of the money she deposited with her former colleague and good friend, named Ashley MacArthur. Jeffrey tried to challenge the actions of the former wife through the court, but the consideration of this claim was slowed down. And here, for custody of a small son, Wright unfolded a real war. The man accused his ex-wife that she took the heir to another state without his consent, as well as prevented their meetings and communication. In addition, Taylor behaved aggressively towards the ex-spouse. She yelled, scandalized, and even attacked him when he came to visit their son. In the middle of 2016, when Jeffrey once again came to pick up the child for the weekend, which, by the way, was prearranged, Taylor tried to forbid him to do so. First, she started swearing, using foul language, and when Jeffrey did put the boy in his car, Taylor started chasing them, nearly causing an accident. This dangerous behavior became a strong argument in court, and full custody of the child was given to the father, embezzled other people's money. Taylor was strongly disagreed with the court's decision regarding custody of her son, and tried in every possible way to challenge the decision. She filed counterclaims, appeals, consulted with lawyers, and looked for a good lawyer who would represent her interests in this matter. But all of this required a lot of money, and she started spending what she had withdrawn from her and her ex-husband's joint account. It had been almost a year and a half since she had deposited about $40,000 with her close friend, Ashley MacArthur. She promised Taylor to put a cashier's check for the same amount in a safe deposit box. But in fact, forging a signature simply transferred all the funds to her personal account, to which Wright did not have access. Ashley herself spent them at her own discretion, and when she was asked to return the money, they, in fact, no longer existed. After Taylor brought up the subject for the first time in a long time, MacArthur began to come up with various excuses and justifications for not going to the bank with her. She had health problems, she had a breakdown at work, and the bank supposedly had a glitch and needed to wait. But time passed, and Wright realized more and more clearly that the money was not going to be returned to her. At first, she tried to talk to Ashley, whom she had known for years and whom she had trusted to the letter. But Ashley kept making excuses and telling her to wait. After a few months, Taylor moved on to threats, promising to involve her connections from her past and current jobs. Taylor realized that threats would have little effect on MacArthur, since she was married to a local sheriff's deputy. Eventually, Ashley called Wright on September 7th and suggested that they meet to go to the bank together and withdraw the money. Taylor agreed, but immediately sensed a catch. They agreed to meet on the morning of September 8th, and the night before, Taylor decided to hang out with Cassandra in one of the local bars and honestly confided her fears and doubts. She felt threatened by MacArthur, but Cassandra tried to reassure her that nothing terrible could happen. Mysterious disappearance or escape? On the morning of September 8th, while Taylor and Cassandra were having breakfast in their kitchen, Ashley drove up to the house in her car. Wright quickly got ready, said goodbye to Cassandra, and told her that she was going to work from the bank, so they wouldn't see each other until the evening. Waller had a strange, uneasy feeling that she couldn't find a logical explanation for. That day was the last time she would see Taylor alive. Taylor promised to call back and tell her how it went, but it was already noon and the girl remained silent. Then Cassandra decided to dial her number herself, but the calls kept getting rejected, and towards evening, Wright received a message from her phone saying that she needed to leave town for a few days to sort herself out. She also wrote that the money issue had been resolved and asked not to be disturbed for the being. Waller found the whole situation very strange and disturbing. After failing to reach Taylor, she went to the police on September 9th to file a missing persons report. However, the law enforcers took a nonchalant attitude and considered the messenger messages as enough reason to consider Taylor alive and unharmed. They decided to delay the search for a few days and afterward extended it some more. The search for the missing person, it was not until September 14th, after the police were contacted by Wright's concerned parents and sister, who had been unable to contact her for almost a week, that Taylor was officially reported missing and a large-scale search began. Taylor's loved ones unanimously stated that she could not just disappear like that. The girl too dear to her son, and on his call she would certainly answer. But the 7-year-old boy tried in vain to call his mom for more than a week. Moreover, almost all of the missing persons documents and personal belongings were left at home, and no transactions had been made on her credit cards since the of September 7th. Wright took nothing with her, and on September 9th she stopped responding to messages, although she was still logged into her profile that day. However, everyone had already guessed that someone else was writing from Taylor's phone. Police officers searched the house in which Wright lived with her new girlfriend. They made sure that all her documents were there, which meant she couldn't have traveled far. They also came across a permit to buy a gun, but the gun itself wasn't in the house. Cassandra explained that Taylor had purchased it for self-defense and had never used it before, but had taken it with her the day she disappeared. First suspects. Already in the first interrogations, Cassandra realized that law enforcers were trying to accuse her of Taylor's disappearance and were looking for evidence to. However, she managed to confirm her alibi because she had been at work since the morning, where she was seen by dozens of colleagues. After that, the detectives turned their attention to the ex-husband of the missing woman, with whom she had a very difficult relationship after the divorce. Jeffrey had a clear motive, because he and Taylor were still suing for custody of their son. In addition, the ex-spouse withdrew from their joint account an impressive amount, embezzling money to himself. But soon this version fell apart, because the man was all the time in Jacksonville and did not leave the state of North Carolina. He took care of the child, went to work, and was always visible. It wasn't until afterward that police finally decided to talk to 41-year-old Ashley MacArthur, who Cassandra had been pointing out from the beginning. When she was finally called in for questioning, the lady was acting very strange and defiant. She was in high spirits, flirting with the officers, and didn't seem at all bothered by the situation. According to Ashley, she gave Taylor the full amount that day, after which they went for a little drive around town and then said goodbye. She also added that Wright looked upset and planned to leave town for a couple days to sort things out. She hasn't seen her again since that day, or even contacted her on the phone. Still, Ashley figured that nothing bad could happen to Wright, because she was a martial artist, physically strong, and carried a gun with her at all times. There was no evidence against MacArthur, so she was released after questioning. Nevertheless, the suspect's behavior and story raised a lot of questions. The police decided to take a closer look at the woman and found out that she had worked as a forensic technician for a long time and had visited numerous crime scenes to help collect evidence. She was keenly aware of what mistakes to avoid leaving a trail, and what evidence detectives would look for first. In addition, the data from the cell phone carrier showed that the women had been calling and texting constantly for the past couple of months, and judging by the nature of their communication, Ashley wasn't going to pay back the debt, and Taylor was very worried about that. Another oddity was that MacArthur, after the interrogation, began to call the station every day to inquire about the progress of the investigation. She herself claimed to be worried about her friend, but the police realized that she just wanted to make sure that the detectives were not on her trail. New questionable details. About a week after the first interview, the cops decided to talk to Ashley again. This time she did not look so cheerful and carefree, as she realized that she was taken thoroughly. The woman tried to put the blame on the ex-husband of the missing woman, but when she learned that he had been removed from the list of suspects, she changed her tactics. She claimed that Jeffrey could have hired someone to kill Taylor, and allegedly Taylor knew about it and feared for her life, and therefore carried a gun. In addition, MacArthur allegedly recalled new details that seemed very inconclusive to detectives. She claimed that Wright was very upset that day, so they went together to the Ashley family farm to ride horses and unwind a bit. In the process, Taylor allegedly admitted that she was losing her nerve and was planning to travel to another city to purchase illegal substances. As regular medications were not helping her fight the stress she developed from her problems with her ex-husband. When asked why she did not report it immediately, MacArthur said she did not want her friend to get into trouble. Nevertheless, despite the lack of solid evidence, she remained the main suspect, because she had a clear motive, not to return a large sum of money, and the transaction itself was not documented, so Ashley could claim that long ago gave all the money. A new twist in the case, the police decided to trace the route of the women on the day of the disappearance of Wright on the signal of their cell phones, and found that it doesn't coincide with the one that Ashley voiced. It turned out that they had not gone to the horse farm owned by the MacArthur family, but somewhere much farther out of town. Then, the suspect's cell phone signal suddenly disappeared, as she had probably turned it off. A few hours later, a message came from Taylor's phone saying she needed to leave and sort herself out, and soon the signal from that device disappeared as well. But on the morning of September 8th, Ashley's gadget was back on, already in Pensacola. The suspect probably feared that their phones would be recorded together, and therefore turned off her cell phone for a while. When asked directly about it, Ashley said her smartphone simply ran out of battery, but soon it was possible to determine the geolocation from where the last messages were sent on behalf of Taylor. The location turned out to be a lawn, vacant house with a plot of land belonging to MacArthur's parents, which she had forgotten to mention. Detectives got a search warrant that same day and went there. Concreted corpse. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about the vacant country house. The structure and the surrounding area looked abandoned, but the backyard had a suspiciously fresh bed of flowers that appeared to have been planted there recently, and the ground beneath them was still loose. The cops decided to check the strange flower bed, but after digging a couple times with a shovel, they hit something hard. The obstacle turned out to be a rectangular-shaped layer of concrete, which had obviously been used to fill a shallow hole. But the most gruesome discovery awaited law enforcement when the slab was removed, and inside it they found the skeleton of a woman with a bullet hole in the back of her head. The body of missing Wright was identified almost immediately from her dental records, but the cause of death, due to severe decomposition, could not be accurately determined. But since no other obvious injuries were found, it was assumed that she had been shot in the head. However, there was also a blunt force trace on her skull, but it was not fatal. On October 17th, Ashley was arrested, and her home was thoroughly searched, during which a bank check with Wright's forged signature was found. Ashley had used it to wire money to Taylor Wright's personal account, and spent it as she saw fit. When the suspect was presented with this document, she became visibly nervous, began to change her statement, and tried to convince investigators that she had returned the money in cash from her own savings, the murder weapon, and reconstructing the timeline. Ashley and her husband Zachary had several firearms at home, but none of them matched the one that fired the bullet into the back of Wright's head. However, a revolver that belonged to the murdered woman, and had been with her on the day she disappeared, was soon found in an abandoned outbuildings on the property where the body was found. Ballistics testing confirmed that it was the weapon that had been used to shoot the deceased. MacArthur categorically denied involvement, but became increasingly confused in her testimony. She claimed she was being framed, accusing Taylor's ex-husband or current girlfriend. She said the body had been hidden on purpose on her family property, which had not been visited in years, and the murder weapon had been left there. Due to the fact that the suspect refused to admit her guilt and cooperate with the investigation, the chronology of events of that fateful day was restored very roughly. So, in the morning, Ashley herself came to pick up the victim, already knowing that she would take her life, and Taylor, suspecting something wrong, took a gun with her. Judging by the cell phone signal, the women did indeed drive around the city for a while, and apparently during that time the killer lured the victim to a country house, convincing her that she would give her the money there. Once there, Ashley likely stunned Taylor with a blow to the head, and while she was disoriented, shot her in the back of the head with her own gun. The next day, on September 9th, MacArthur was caught on surveillance cameras at the Home Depot hardware store, where she was buying concrete as well as soil for flowers. Trial and conviction. The defendant's lawyers insisted that all the evidence found was circumstantial, and no direct evidence was found linking their client to the murder. In addition, the woman must have had accomplices, as it would have been very problematic for her to dispose of the body and cover her tracks alone. Ashley's husband became a suspect, and was also arrested. During the investigation, it turned out that MacArthur had a young lover, a certain Brandon Beatty, with whom she had been dating for several years. Actually, the embezzled money that belonged to Wright, she spent back in the spring of 2017 on the purchase of a small yacht for her favorite. When the defendant's husband learned about it, he agreed to testify against her, and admitted that Ashley is obsessed with money, and could well go to the crime for such a large sum. A key witness was soon found, a barmaid at a local club named Audrey Warren. She said that Ashley was a frequent guest of the establishment where she worked, and they were always chatting. In a state of alcoholic intoxication, MacArthur became very talkative, and therefore Audrey knew about the presence of her lover, and about her conflict with Taylor. In recent months, according to Warren, Ashley was constantly talking about how the world would be cleaner if Taylor suddenly died. She also went over various ways to eliminate the woman. In particular, she claimed she could easily give her an overdose by putting illegal substances in her beer, and no one would ever prove her guilty. During the investigation, financial fraud involving MacArthur also surfaced. As it turned out, she had her own business of installing various slot machines, and the proceeds from them were to be divided in half between Ashley and her clients. However, the greedy woman was pocketing about 75% of the profits. When the scandal broke out, she invited her clients to her office, where the documents were kept, in order to prove her innocence. But during the night, a fire mysteriously broke out in the building, destroying the entire bookkeeping. Experts found clear signs of arson, and MacArthur immediately blamed the disgruntled partners for everything and filed a lawsuit. In August 2019, the defendant was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of qualifying for parole after no more than 25 years. She was also additionally sentenced to 7 years in prison for financial fraud and office arson. He lives with a grief that will never go away after two close women in his life were deprived of their lives by criminals. There's a saying that lightning never strikes the same place twice. But our hero, by a cruel twist of fate, has experienced the opposite. Jim Larson lost two beloved women at the hands of random criminals 7 years apart. His life was torn apart twice by men who enter the lives of others only in the worst nightmares. It began with his sister, Sonia Larson, who aspired to become a teacher, had just started her freshman year at the University of Florida. One August evening in 1990, she went to Walmart with her roommate Christina Powell to buy some essentials. Danny Rowling, a drifter who claimed to be possessed and following a demon's instructions, spotted the two young women and followed them home. He broke into the dormitory and caught them asleep in their beds. He stabbed them repeatedly. Danny Rowling, known as the Gainesville Criminal, took the lives of and mutilated 5 college students in Florida, leaving the families of his victims and people across the country in shock. There were more deaths, but people remember the name of the serial criminal and forget his victims. But not in our story. The tragic loss of Sonia Larson never stopped haunting her family, leaving a deep wound from the loss of a daughter and a sister. Not even in their darkest dreams could the Larson family have imagined that the tragic, violent death in their family would repeat, forcing them to relive the all over again. On the morning of June 10, 1997, Carla Larson dropped her daughter off at daycare and headed to work at Centex Rooney, where she worked as a project engineer. It was an unbearably hot day on the construction site in Florida. Shortly before lunch, Carla told her colleague, Cindy Harris, that she would be a little late, as she planned to stop by the grocery store to pick up food and drinks for an afternoon meeting. Around noon, she left work and headed to the new grocery store on International Drive near Osceola. A couple of hours passed and Carla Larson didn't return to work. She was supposed to be at an important meeting, but never showed up. Her colleagues grew concerned and began searching on their own, retracing Carla's route from the site to the supermarket she had planned to visit. They still held out hope that her car might have broken down, her phone might have died, or some other minor incident had delayed her return. But the search proved fruitless. There was no sign of Carla, her presence, or her car anywhere. Around 4 p.m., Cindy called Carla's husband, Jim Larson, to tell him that Carla hadn't returned from the store and hadn't been at work since noon. Jim called the Orange County Sheriffs to report his wife's disappearance. Their romance began 8 years ago, when they were both in college. Jim was studying graphic design and was completely captivated by Carla's beauty and charm. He couldn't believe his luck in finding someone like her, kind, thoughtful, and compassionate. The feeling was mutual, and in time they got married. They settled into a small home on Stone Court in Orlando. It was Carla who pulled Jim back from the edge, helping him rediscover the will to live. After the tragic loss of his sister, she held him, reminded him of the good things, the reasons to keep going, and find happiness again. Carla graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in civil engineering, and they moved to Atlanta, then back to Florida, in search of job opportunities while building their lives together. She wanted a child, but Jim hesitated, not wanting to bring a new life into a world where people like Danny Rolling preyed on the innocent. Finally, after extensive counseling and his wife's unwavering support, Jim found some peace of mind. Soon, the Larsons welcomed their long-awaited daughter, Jessica. They bought a small house on a quiet cul-de-sac in Orlando. They installed solid locks and a home security system. Jim even bought a guard dog to make sure his family was fully protected both inside and outside their home. Carla was set to work on a new amusement park project in Orlando while Jim took a job at a local store. They were happy, finding joy in everyday moments. Carla and Jim balanced their responsibilities as parents without neglecting their important and demanding jobs. But one day, the peaceful life Jim had worked so hard to create took a tragic turn. On an ordinary summer day, Carla disappeared. Tom Woodard was on duty when he received a radio call about Jim's report of Carla Larson's disappearance. A seasoned officer, Tom assumed this was another case of a domestic argument, so he didn't take it too seriously at first. However, he decided to check the situation anyway. When talking to Jim, the sheriff noticed something odd. Jim seemed overly anxious and extremely nervous, unlike others he had encountered in similar situations. The sheriff was convinced it was a typical missing persons case, assuming that Carla had either left Jim due to an argument or taken a break to gather her thoughts. But there had been no family issues, no fights. Everything was stable and happy. What Tom Woodard didn't know at the time was that Jim, having gone through the ordeal in Gainesville and still grappling with the trauma of losing his sister, was under immense pressure from the fear of losing his wife. He feared that this disappearance could once again end in the loss of a beloved woman. The search for Carla began. Family members insisted that it was highly unlikely that Mrs. Larson would have left her family, especially since she had a 1-year-old daughter and a strong marriage. During questioning, 37-year-old Jim Larson said he had been working at Home Depot until 3 p.m. That afternoon, around 4 p.m., he received a call from someone at his wife's workplace telling him that she hadn't been seen since noon. But how could a young woman vanish from a supermarket parking lot in broad daylight, like the protagonist in the movie The Vanishing, starring Sandra Bullock? Eyewitness reports helped confirm that the missing woman was indeed last seen heading toward a grocery store near the construction site. A signed receipt from the store verified that she had made it there and purchased the items she planned to buy. The question remained, what happened after Carla left the supermarket? She could have met someone. Investigators were trying to determine the time and location where the woman went missing, as her white-gray Ford Explorer with the license plate TGX 99V was also missing. Eyewitnesses further reported seeing a white Ford Explorer speeding recklessly on a dirt road near a wooded area in the afternoon. The driver was described as a white male with dark hair and a deep tan. A composite sketch of the suspected abductor was created. A search team was sent to the area to investigate, as the vehicle could be a crime scene. Orlando is not a place where such things happen often, so many volunteers joined the search for Carla. News of the young woman's disappearance from the supermarket parking lot terrified the city's residents, especially those in College Park. The volunteers put up flyers in grocery stores and at bus stops. Search teams combed through the area surrounding the store. With each passing hour, the search radius grew larger. A helicopter was brought in to survey more ground. During the entire two-day search, the homicide department and Carla's colleagues refused to give up, even as hopes of finding her alive became increasingly slim with each passing minute. Early in the morning on June 12th, after 36 hours of searching the same area repeatedly, two of Carla's co-workers stumbled upon something. The mutilated body of a woman lay in a swamp, covered by a towel. After the gruesome discovery, one of the men explained that he and his friend had gotten out of the car to look around when they suddenly caught a strange smell, but couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Jack lit a cigarette from the small flicker of his lighter. A slight breeze carried the scent in their direction. They walked slowly for about 70 feet, and at 3:39 p.m. they found the woman. She was lying behind a bush in the swampy area, partially covered by sand. The men had to stare for a long time to realize that what they found was, in fact, Carla Larson, who had disappeared 2 days earlier. Her long blonde braid was loose down her back. She was undressed, and her head was covered with a blue towel. All her jewelry was gone, except for her wedding ring. Jim Larson and his family were conducting their own search in the area when they saw the patrol cars. A police chaplain informed Jim about the discovery in the woods. When the police found her, half covered in sand, he felt nothing. But no one knew that inside, the man had already burned out, consumed by emotional agony. The police were so puzzled by Mr. Larson's behavior that they subjected him to a polygraph test to determine whether he was involved in her death. Local residents, who had been following the search for Carla, even accused Larson of seeming too detached during the investigation. But what they didn't understand was that he was simply spent. Jim couldn't believe this had happened to him twice. He stopped eating and sleeping. He lost a lot of weight and walked around with dark circles under his eyes. The police cordoned off the crime scene, called in the medical examiner, and brought investigators to what they believed could be the site of a crime. After the initial inspection of the location where the body was found, investigators suspected that there had been an assault, as the victim was found without clothes, and all her jewelry was missing except for her wedding ring. So was it an assault or a robbery? The criminal didn't just take valuables, they also took a woman's life. However, first they needed to confirm whether the body found was, in fact, Carla Larson. The intense heat and humidity in Florida had taken their toll. Identifying the body had become extremely difficult due to the rain, animal activity, and insects. The body had begun to decompose, which altered its chemical composition, and the forensic team worried about the DNA evidence they could collect. Time was running out. Nevertheless, investigators were nearly certain that the badly decomposed body belonged to Mrs. Larson, because her car had last been seen in that area. The towel found on the victim was identified by Jim Larson, who confirmed that a towel like it had been in his wife's car. Her usual clothes were missing, along with her handbag. The autopsy report deeply upset the investigators. The decomposition had destroyed all evidence and traces that could lead to the criminal. The report concluded that the cause of death was strangulation, and the suspected assault was not confirmed. Could a woman really have been deprived of her life over a few pieces of jewelry and a car? Since the body didn't lead them to the criminal, the next priority was to find the car. It might contain the clues and answers the family and the public were desperately seeking. The white Ford Explorer with the license plate TGX 99V was declared missing. Information about the vehicle was shared in the press and on television. After 2 weeks of waiting, the police received a crucial phone call. On June 26, 1997, at 11:23 p.m., a call came in reporting a truck on fire in a vacant lot in Cocoa Beach, but it was black. As the vehicle burned, it became clear that the black color wasn't soot or ash, nor was it the original color of the car. In certain areas of the body, white paint showed through after the fire. Excessive spray on the tires revealed that the black paint had been applied unprofessionally with a cheap can of spray paint. The vehicle was brought to the police garage, where forensic technicians began their work. During the investigation, it was determined that the burned truck, located 62 miles from Orlando, was indeed white in color and belonged to the victim. From Jim, experts learned that the vehicle had been equipped with a radar detector. Despite the fire damage, detectives managed to find the mount where the detector had been, confirming that the car belonged to the Larsons. The police focused their efforts on locating the radar detector. The investigation stalled until an unexpected love triangle helped crack the case and find her criminal. In Central Florida, there are hundreds of vehicles just like hers, but one phone call from a woman drew particular attention from the detectives because of the bizarre story she had to tell. On the day Carla Larson disappeared, Angel Huggins and her family had arrived in Orlando. Angel explained that although they had come to Orlando together, she left the city without her husband. Angel told Orange County detectives Cameron Wire and John Linner that their family trip had turned into a disaster due to substance abuse, violence, and infidelity. Their family vacation ended the night it began, on June 9th, at a motel near Disneyland. Angel Huggins recounted that her husband, John Huggins, had nearly strangled her into unconsciousness because she had refused to be intimate with him. The next morning, he left the motel on West Highway 192 and didn't return until noon. Later that day, John Huggins arrived at Angel's mother's house in Melbourne, driving a white truck that matched the description of the victim's vehicle. John and Angel were in the process of divorcing, and she was furious with him over his infidelity. During their stay in Melbourne, John had gotten involved with Angel's sister, Tammy. She also told the detectives about John's friend, Kevin Smith, who had allowed Huggins to park the white SUV at his house for a few days. The detectives were very interested in this story, so they went to Kevin's house to ask him some questions. But Kevin wasn't home, and it was his girlfriend who answered the door. Kim Allred confirmed that a white Ford Explorer had indeed been parked in their driveway for a few days. She was upset because it had been parked in her spot, and at one point, she had lost control of her small truck while driving, crashed into the Ford Explorer, and dented it. Her truck still had some white paint from the Explorer on it. Collision specialists took a small paint sample and sent it to the lab to confirm whether it belonged to Carla's car. This was necessary to prove Kevin Smith's involvement in the disappearance of Carla's car, as the paint from Mrs. Larson's vehicle had been found on Kim's car. The police were close to proving that Carla's Ford Explorer had been parked at Kevin Smith's house. But before they could establish his full involvement, they still had questions for him. They needed to find out who had been driving the SUV. Kevin Smith refused to say who the driver was, even though he matched the sketch of the man seen driving Carla's car that day. He also mentioned that his friend John Huggins had asked him to park the car temporarily. Kevin inspected the vehicle and noticed a radar detector inside the truck. He ripped it out of the car and kept it for a while, but fearing he might get caught, he hid it in the yard. Smith claimed he had nothing to do with the car, stating that his friend John Huggins had driven it to the parking spot. Kevin feared the car might have been stolen, but he wasn't willing to betray his friend. He was eager to prove he wasn't lying and wasn't involved in the woman's disappearance. After speaking with the police, Kevin voluntarily handed over the radar detector. The police interrogated Kevin further, and he eventually admitted to finding the radar detector, wiping off all fingerprints, and throwing it into the bushes near his house. The police recovered the detector and confirmed that it belonged to the victim. By tracing the serial number, detectives confirmed that it had been installed in Carla's car, providing the first solid proof that her vehicle had been parked at Kevin's and that John Huggins had driven it there. Now investigators had a paint match, the radar detector, and they had found the vehicle, But the key question remained unanswered. John Huggins immediately became the prime suspect. A deep dive into John Huggins' past revealed an extensive criminal history. He had a record of committing armed robberies and was a known bank thief. It turned out that there were active warrants for John's arrest for robberies in Florida, and he was known to carry weapons. When John Huggins' face appeared on TV, victims of his previous crimes recognized him, as he had a long rap sheet. He had robbed banks, looted convenience stores, and committed armed assaults. But before making an arrest, the police wanted to ensure the evidence against him was solid, especially since the fate of Carla's jewelry was still unknown. To recap, diamond earrings, a garnet ring, a chain, and a pendant had all been taken from the victim, but the search for the jewelry threatened to drag on, until detectives caught another lucky break. In a phone call, Angel Huggins reported that she had made a disturbing discovery that might bring the investigation to an end and put Carla's criminal behind bars. She explained that she and her mother had searched the house and found one of Carla's missing pieces of jewelry. Following Angel's call, the police conducted 2 extensive searches of Angel's mother's house and the shed on the property, but they were unable to find any incriminating evidence. However, while reaching for insect spray in the shed, the woman noticed a screwdriver on top of a box. On a whim, she unscrewed the lid of an electrical box in the shed and found the victim's jewelry hidden inside. No fingerprints were found on the jewelry, the electrical box, or its lid. Looking at the final piece of the puzzle, we see John driving a stolen car. The radar detector recovered the attempt to strangle his wife at the hotel. The hotel room they stayed in was directly across from the supermarket, and the dates of their stay matched the day Carla disappeared. On May 28, 1998, John Huggins was charged with the crime of taking Carla Larson's life, as well as car theft, abduction, and robbery. John Huggins was arrested in Maryland. After he was indicted by a grand jury in Orange County, Huggins filed a motion to have his case moved. The trial court granted the motion, transferring the case to Duval County. On January 25, 1999, 2 years after Carla Larson's death, the case finally went to trial. During the trial, as the jury reviewed the overwhelming evidence of his guilt, they heard about Carla Larson's last horrifying moments. We have to ask ourselves, based on the evidence, what went through Carla's mind that made her feel safe getting into a car with a criminal? But she didn't get into the car willingly. He followed her to her vehicle, and all of this happened on a regular day in a busy shopping center parking lot. At trial, the prosecution laid out its version of the events of that tragic day. After the argument with his wife, John needed an outlet for his anger and to calm down. He began looking for a target to rob and get some quick cash. In the parking lot, he came across Carla Larson and thought she would be an easy victim. The young, blonde, beautiful woman caught his attention. John Huggins approached her in the parking lot, armed with a gun, and forced her to remain silent and get into the car. His initial plan was to steal the vehicle, which he intended to use later. He drove her to the nearest wooded area, forced her out of the car, and made her undress. He likely had intentions of assaulting her, but he was so furious with his wife that he couldn't go through with it. His anger toward Angel was so overwhelming that he lashed out at another woman, ending her life in a fit of rage. So, in his mind, the way to deal with an argument with his wife was to end the life of another woman, a wife and mother. According to court documents, investigators believed that the 30-year-old Orlando resident had been assaulted, but this was never publicly confirmed as there was no definitive proof. Huggins was never charged with assault. The North Carolina prosecutor was awaiting results from tests on the fluids collected at the crime scene. Huggins had a long criminal record for domestic violence, armed robbery, and burglary, but he had never been charged with a crime of this nature. Unlike Danny Rolling, he had never deprived someone of their life before. In July after his arrest, he refused to provide a DNA sample. In response, detectives brought him Marlboro Lights and allowed him to smoke during a 2-hour interrogation. According to court records, investigators collected 8 saliva-stained cigarette filters and sent them for DNA analysis. The evidence was circumstantial, but the prosecution's case was strong, and the jury's opinion was far more critical. Dr. Shashi Gore, a medical expert in the case, testified at trial that the significant decomposition of the body indicated it had been there for about 2 days. Based on autopsy results, it was determined that the cause of death was strangulation. On February 3, 1999, John Huggins was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life, vehicle theft, robbery, and abduction. The jury recommended the death penalty by a vote of 8-4. After considering the aggravating and mitigating factors, the trial court sentenced Huggins to death. John Huggins maintained his innocence and filed an appeal, delaying his punishment. On September 19, 2002, the trial court issued a new ruling sentencing Huggins to death for his first-degree conviction. The trial court found 5 aggravating factors, as previously established by the jury, and 13 non-statutory mitigating factors. The trial court also sentenced him to 60 days for petty theft, 30 years for vehicle theft, and life imprisonment for abduction. John Huggins remained in the Orange County Jail without bail, continuing to claim his innocence in the first-degree conviction. For the 10 years following the trial, John Huggins remained on death row, maintaining his innocence. His death sentence was carried out by lethal injection on September 19, 2002. Reflecting on Carla Larson's case, it's clear that this could have happened to anyone. Carla wasn't doing anything dangerous or risky. She should have been completely safe. Jim Larson is convinced that the pain never truly goes away. You just have to learn to live with it. In an interview, Mr. Larson said, "The love of my life is gone. Our story wasn't supposed to end in such a tragic way. Carla and I could have done anything. We went rafting, climbed mountains, went on hikes, ran together. She looked at me with her bright blue, happy eyes. One thing that haunts me to this day is that Carla, because of what happened to Sonia in Gainesville, knew exactly how it was going to end when John Huggins took control of her. So her final moments were spent in the full realization of the horror and the expectation of her death. This event left Mr. Larson with a deep void and an unrelenting, numbing pain. Sitting in the neat living room of his home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Orlando, the kind of home most middle-class Americans think of as safe, he continues to fear life. But those who haven't lost 2 loved ones don't see the world through Jim Larson's eyes. He continues to long for them and sees danger in everything because he still has a daughter to raise. Now, Mr. Larson finds his reason to keep going in his daughter Jessica. He truly believes and hopes that the little girl didn't fully grasp the crimes that took her mother and aunt, and he prays she'll never experience fear and horror again, because lightning has already struck him twice, and it won't strike a 3rd time. The reverse side of goodness sometimes has irreparable consequences, but people still continue to do good deeds and do not wait for reciprocal gratitude. In our story, a sincere act done years earlier not only completely changed the lives of all the heroes, but also resulted in death. At 4:45 a.m. on March 2, 2018, Travis County, Texas police officers received a call from a woman seeking help. She reported that she was hiding in a closet when she heard several gunshots in the house, and the likely gunman was still inside. During the phone call, the dispatcher asked the woman not to come out of hiding and to wait for police officers who were on their way to the house. Minutes later, the house was already cordoned off by police, and the woman in the closet turned out to be local resident Corey Shaughnessy. The woman's condition was very discouraging. Corey did not understand what had happened and was very frightened. In the kitchen, her husband Theodore Shaughnessy was lying in a pool of his own blood near the table. "Sit back, because today we are investigating another tragic case together." Theodore Shaughnessy was born February 7, 1963, and was the youngest child in a large family Shaughnessy who lived in Arizona near Phoenix. Ted from an early age loved fast cars and everything associated with them. As a teenager, he literally dreamed of sports cars. Theodore grew up absolutely fearless man, for whom adrenaline was the best way to cheer up and feel the taste for life. Nevertheless, he was a kind and cheerful guy, a good friend and a good son. At the age of 20, Ted met Corey Garman at a local arcade. The young men immediately liked each other, as they had a lot in common, including a love of jewelry and books. Sympathy quickly turned into true love, and in 1989, they were married. After their marriage, the Shaughnessy couple moved to Austin, Texas, where they quickly settled in and launched the family business opening Gallery Jewelers. It was a high-level operation that the Shaughnessy family built together. Corey had a passion for gemstones, fine art, and worked as an appraiser for the entire family company. Ted, on the other hand, was the face of the store, as he had a talent for connecting with people, and they were not just drawn to him but were infused with his energy. He was very friendly and active because wherever he went, he became the soul of the company. This quality perfectly helped in business, as he could find a common language with clients and partners and achieve the best conditions for all parties. The business became quite successful, and after a while, the family fortune was estimated at $8 million. But despite the wealth, Theodore always remained generous and attentive to others. He often bought food for the needy and regularly made donations to charitable foundations. The family business continued to grow, and the couple purchased a beautiful new home near their store. The couple complemented each other and seemed like the perfect tandem. Indeed, everything seemed almost perfect if only for one thing. The couple had no children. As the jewelry business grew, Ted and Corey decided to expand their family as well. In 2000, they made a life-changing decision and adopted a 16-month-old boy, taking him from an orphanage in Ukraine. It was just instant and unconditional love. The little gray-eyed boy was named Nicholas. Such a long-awaited event completed the family life of Shaughnessy, because now, they had everything for absolute happiness. Nicholas grew up an active and obedient child. He loved animals and cars just like his dad Ted, because he often took the boy with him to the track. Father and son went karting together, rode sports cars, and regularly spent time together just walking in the park. In high school, Nicholas became interested in car dismantling and even launched his own small business, in which his parents helped him with finances. The young man bought the necessary equipment and enlisted the help of friends. In the same period of time, Nicholas met Jackie Edison. Immediately after meeting, the young people felt a mutual attraction, but after meeting Nicholas's parents, they did not like the young lady. Corey felt that she was not suitable for him. But despite this, no one prevented the relationship of teenagers, in order not to lose touch with Nicholas. After a while, Jackie was able to win their favor and started spending so much time at the Shaughnessy house that they let her move in. In August 2017, Nick and Jackie moved away from his parents to start a new life in College Station. She at school and he as a day trader with financial support from his parents. The young man was very attached to his parents and tried not to cut ties with his family and made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit them. Everything seemed to be going well in his life and nothing seemed to portend trouble. On March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey awoke to the insistent barking of their dogs. This was generally a common occurrence, as the animals often reacted violently to small animals that might accidentally wander onto the family home's property. Corey thought there was nothing to worry about, and the dogs would quiet down in a few minutes, but Ted decided to check it out. He armed himself with his .40 caliber pistol and went to check the house. Corey laid her head on the pillow and almost immediately fell back asleep. It was only a few seconds later, however, that she heard a gunshot in the kitchen, followed by a series of more shots. Frightened, Corey grabbed her revolver, which was always next to the bed, and went to help her husband, but on her way out of the bedroom, she saw her favorite dog. A dog named Bart had been shot in the doorway. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in it and looked menacing. Corey was frightened and fired indiscriminately, firing all 6 bullets toward the door. Unloading the revolver, she hid in a closet expecting to be found and killed. Luckily, Corey was able to grab her cell phone and called emergency services to report that a criminal had broken into the house. She said she shot one of the attackers and heard moans coming from the room. While speaking with the dispatcher, the frightened woman repeated that someone was moaning, but she didn't know who was making the sounds and wanted to check. However, the dispatcher calmed her down and told her not to leave the shelter and to wait for the police. 15 minutes later, she was informed that the police had arrived at the house. By this point, the moans had died down and there was a sepulchral silence in the house. Corey stepped out of the closet and headed for the front door. As she passed the kitchen, she saw her husband in a pool of blood. He showed no signs of life and shell casings were scattered around him. Overcome with terror, she reached the door and opened it. But there was no one on the doorstep. Coincidentally, the officers had the wrong house, as this street had an unusual precinct layout. The officers were on her neighbor's doorstep trying to figure out which side of the street the shots were coming from. Eventually, they sorted themselves out and ran to the Shaughnessy family home. Waiting for them on the doorstep was a shaking Corey. Her life was completely ruined. She didn't understand what had happened. The police officers went inside and tried to calm the woman down. Corey called her son and reported the attack. She and Jackie immediately left for Austin and arrived at her parents' home around 8 a.m. Theodore Shaughnessy, 55, was dead after being shot multiple times in the head, back, and thigh. Family, acquaintances, and friends were horrified by what had happened. No one suspected that they could have deadly enemies capable of being shot at point-blank range in such cold blood in the middle of the night in their own home. After the tragedy, Nick and Jackie stayed in the house with Corey to give her the support she needed and to participate in the investigation. Law enforcement officers examined the crime scene. 2 different types of .40 and .38 caliber shell casings were found, which means the shooting was from 2 different guns. No signs of forced entry were found, but in the far bedroom, an open window with the safety netting removed drew attention. The perpetrators must have entered through it. Here, the forensic team also managed to find the first fingerprint, which was immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. Police spoke to several neighbors about the Shaughnessy family and if they saw anything suspicious. One neighbor told police that this was not the first time Shaughnessy's home had been targeted, as they own a chain of jewelry stores. The police took Corey's pajamas, which she was wearing for examination, and also swabbed her hands for gunshot residue. Corey was honest from the beginning about the fact that she had fired her gun. The police began their investigation and quickly ruled out burglary, noting no forced entry and no stolen valuables. Shifting their attention to the murder investigation, they found that all the doors in the house were intact except for the entrance to Nicholas Shaughnessy's room. The door had been opened. An examination of the room revealed that a firearm was missing from a dresser with a .40 caliber pistol drawer. It turned out to be the only item missing from the house. Given that the caliber matched one of the guns used in the detectives assumed it was the one used to kill Ted. Nick, Jackie, and Corey agreed to help the investigation in any way they could. Corey allowed the police to search her cell phone, and although Nick said he hadn't been in Austin in about a month, he and Jackie did the same. All 3 also agreed to answer questions at the station. The goal of the police was simply to try to get as much information as possible about the family and the events of that day, to get on the trail of the perpetrators. Investigators were still unsure if the murder was part of a random attack, a botched robbery, or if it was a targeted crime. They found no unidentified prints at the scene, so they had to wonder if the sole surviving victim, Corey Shaughnessy, could actually have been a suspect. After all, she was the only person in the house. The police couldn't get past the fact that the shooters left Corey alive. They also found it odd that the shooters were in the house for 17 minutes before the shooting occurred and nothing was stolen from the house. Assistant Prosecutor Amy Meredith, who examined the scene of the tragedy, was certain that Ted Shaughnessy knew the attacker. She was also certain that the house was too big and too dark for a couple of random burglars or jewelry thieves to navigate it so quickly. Corey Shaughnessy was increasingly under suspicion because investigators believed she had a motive. Police learned that Corey was the beneficiary of Ted's $1 million policy. Their home and business were also worth a lot of money, but there was no evidence against Corey. But Corey wasn't the only family member who aroused suspicion. Shaughnessy's son, Nicholas, who was more than 100 miles away from the scene of the tragedy at the time of the crime, also came under suspicion. On the morning of the tragedy, he was agitated, and one important moment caught the attention of investigators. After questioning him, he walked directly to a wide-open side window on the first floor. It was the window to his room. He went to that particular side of the house to look specifically at that window, which was not visible just from the front of the house. It was the exact window that the criminals entered through, but at that point, Nick had no information from the investigators about the criminals entering through that window. After all, how would he know the point of entry if he had no part in creating it? Police dug deeper into Nicholas's financial history and discovered that he had been struggling financially for a long period of time, leading up to the crime. An important revelation was that Nicholas had borrowed $30,000 from his mother for the business, and she had recently written him a message, reminding him to repay the loan. In addition, he owed a neighbor $20,600. These financial stressors represented a potential motive to commit the crime. However, the investigation took a more important turn when it was discovered that Nicholas was the sole beneficiary of a $2 million insurance payout in the event that his parents did not pass away. This detail intensified the intense scrutiny on Nick, making him a prime suspect in the eyes of the police. Nicholas's phone also caught the investigators' attention, specifically an app that gave him access to the alarm system at his parents' home. Corey told them that the family often chose not to arm the system and that it was disabled that night. But detectives noticed something in the account's history. Corey said they only used the alarm system when they weren't home. However, the system detected that there was an activation to open a window at 4:27 a.m. The system detected that there was an activation to open a window. About 17 minutes later, the system detected broken glass. Another surprise in the search of the home was Nicholas and Jackie's marriage certificate. It turned out that they were secretly married back in August 2017 and didn't disclose their secret marriage until after the murder happened. But the closer police looked, the more compromising evidence they found that Nick and Jackie were indeed planning to kill Shaughnessy's parents. We remember that Nick was more than 100 miles away from Austin at the time of the crime, but phone records showed that he was lying when he said he hadn't been in Austin for a month. On February 28, just 2 days before Ted was killed, his cell phone use was recorded in Austin. Investigators wondered if he had been in town making final preparations. Nicholas and Jackie's phones were examined. They deleted several text messages that had been synchronized with Nicholas's computer. On February 24th, Nick sent Jackie a text message saying he was working on it, and Jackie's response to the text message was, "Do they want $50K or not? We can't afford to pay half that early." The police searched Nicholas and Jackie's apartment. Everyone was shocked at how many cameras were installed in the apartment. The cameras proved that they were at home on the morning of the day of the crime. They found jewelry, ammunition, and guns in the safe. One of the boxes of ammunition was the same make and caliber as one of the murder weapons. It was a .38 caliber pistol and was missing 6 bullets. In other correspondence, Nick asked Jackie to withdraw money from the account. So, if this happens, cash in hand. Jackie had withdrawn $1,000 from the bank just days before the crime. Authorities suspected it was no coincidence. During the investigation, investigators contacted the man who officiated Nick and Jackie's wedding, Nick's high school friend, Spencer Patterson. Although the attempt to contact him was quite difficult, the information obtained was another important piece of evidence to prove Nicholas's guilt. The fingerprint from the window in Nicholas's bedroom proved to be a dead end. It belonged to the man who installed the window, but police learned that Nicholas had used that window to sneak in and out of the house when he lived there. His best friend Spencer also knew about it. Spencer was interviewed by police. He also knew about where Ted and Corey kept the safe in their home. Police searched Spencer's home, car, and cell phone. In the car, police found a .38 caliber handgun. It was sent for forensics, but it was not one of the murder weapons. Spencer's cell phone also showed that he was at home the morning of the crime. Spencer was ruled out as a suspect, but he added to the piggy bank of suspicion against Nicholas. Spencer revealed that shortly before the crime, Nick talked about getting $8 million when Ted and Corey left. In correspondence between Spencer and Nicholas, Shaughnessy tried to hire him to kill the family. "Steal all their stuff, no need for the mask because they will all die," Nick wrote. On May 29, 2018, police arrested Nicholas Shaughnessy and Jackie Edison for criminal solicitation. Corey couldn't believe it. The woman believed the authorities were trying to frame her son, who by then was working in his father's place, at the jewelry store. Corey still believed it was a mistake. She said she needed absolute proof of their involvement. 2 weeks after the arrest, Jackie was released on bail. Corey hired the best lawyer she could find for her son. After the tragedy, in an interview, Corey Shaughnessy said, "You could have told me that aliens landed in the front yard and I would have believed that rather than I would have believed that Nicholas and Jackie were planning to kill us." For months, Corey had been by Nick's side. She truly believed that maybe the kids were involved in something in College Station, where Nicholas owed someone money, or maybe there was something strange with illegal substances, or maybe he told the wrong person that his parents were jewelers. The woman was ready to believe anything but that her son was planning to kill them. But the police were certain that Nick and Jackie were behind the attack. It remained to find out who had shot Ted Shaughnessy, and that was no easy task. After all, the traces and evidence have exhausted themselves, and the investigation has reached a dead end. Time passed, and 4 months after the crime, Detective James Moore decided to review the surveillance video from Nick and Jackie's porch, recorded just 2 days before the attack. For a mother who had struggled for months to keep faith in her son, this was the final straw. Too much had happened to really point to Nicholas and Jackie's involvement, and Corey realized with horror that she had spent months harboring the very people who had planned to kill Ted and her that night. Surveillance footage from the front porch of the house proved to be a major twist in the case. The footage, recorded just 2 days before the attack, shows Nick Shaughnessy greeting 2 men at the front door. One of them is wearing a green t-shirt with Anderson written on it. Detectives rushed to the Anderson Window Company in search of the man from the recording. His name was Cameron Vosmek, and he wasn't home that day. But his wife answered the door and quickly got their attention. She said that a few months earlier, a man named Johnny Leon had asked her husband to commit murder for money, but Cameron turned him down. Police ruled Vosmek out as a suspect. Johnny Leon was later called in for questioning, where he admitted that Nick had tried to hire him for $100,000, but he refused. He was arrested and revealed that he had traveled to Austin with Nicholas a few days before the crime. According to him, they parked in front of Shaughnessy's house. Nicholas walked to the house, came back, and said he couldn't get in. Johnny claimed that he was not involved in the crime after that night. However, his cell phone showed that he was in Austin on the morning of the crime. Johnny did not give the name of the second shooter, but did give his cell phone number. He had been in contact with a man named Arian Smith. Smith claimed he was with his girlfriend and that she could provide him with an alibi. His girlfriend said that on the morning of the day of the crime, Arian left her in a motel room. He left in her car, and she tried to call him several times, but the boyfriend did not answer. Arian's girlfriend told police that he had been carrying a .40 caliber handgun for several days after the crime. The gun was recovered from a member of Smith's family. Arian Smith was arrested. Police also discovered that both men had arrest records. In fact, they had been arrested together for dealing in illegal substances earlier. Nick Shaughnessy and the 2 alleged killers were charged with capital murder. But by the spring of 2021, Amy Meredith left her job as an assistant district attorney, and there was a new district attorney, Jose Garza, whose office made the criminals an offer: avoid a possible death sentence by pleading guilty to a lesser charge of murder, and serve 35 years with the possibility of parole. Leon and Smith agreed. Corey wrote Nicholas a letter and offered to accept the plea bargain. The sentence would be 35 years with the possibility of parole. In April 2021, Nicholas accepted the deal. He could be released when he turned 36 years old. At a hearing in April 2021, Nicholas Shaughnessy pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years of his sentence. Arian Smith and Johnny Leon were sentenced to 35 years, with the possibility of parole. Arian Smith told police that after they shot Ted, he heard gunshots coming from the bedroom and a woman crying. Smith said he begged Leon not to kill Corey and to leave the house. They left because they didn't want to be shot. From prison, Nicholas sent letters to his mom. Corey was finally able to see her son after he had been in prison for 2 years. Corey knew a lot of information about Nicholas and Jackie's case, but she still didn't know who had used the .40 caliber gun because the gun belonged to Ted. In a private conversation, Nicholas revealed that he had given his father's gun to Arian Smith. When this came to light, Corey was able to finally believe that Nicholas was indeed involved in the case. Neither I, my husband, No one in our family nor any of our friends could ever imagine that Nicholas and Jackie would want us killed. Jackie tried to downplay her involvement in planning the crime. She claimed she knew nothing about it. The police knew she was lying because based on the deleted text messages, she knew. She admitted that she had traveled with Nicholas to Austin several times, but said she had never taken Nicholas' words about massacring her parents seriously. Jackie divorced Nicholas while he was in prison. In March 2022, Jackie's charge was changed to conspiracy to commit a felony. In June 2023, Jackie pleaded guilty to attempted conspiracy to commit a felony. She was granted a suspended sentence, meaning she could plead guilty and receive probation. She spent 120 days in jail. She will be on probation for 10 years. Every year for 10 years on the anniversary of Ted Shaughnessy's murder, she will have to spend 2 days in jail. Nicholas was interviewed from prison. He said he wanted to impress Jackie and become rich. Ted Shaughnessy, a registered jeweler, and his wife Corey Shaughnessy, a certified gemologist appraiser, could have shared a prosperous life with their adopted son, Nicholas. Ted, who founded Gallery Jewelers in Austin in 1995, achieved success, earning the family a respected name in their community, was murdered by son Nick, who put a $sign on his parents' lives and decided to take away their happy life. Currently, the victim's son remains incarcerated at the Clemens Unit in Brazoria, Texas. Arian Smith is serving his sentence at the LeBlanc Unit in Beaumont, of the aforementioned state. Johnny Leon remains incarcerated at the Barry B. Telford Unit in New Boston, Texas. This is a story of exemplary transformation that society opened its eyes to too late. Sometimes kindness comes at too high a cost, and the person who seemed close becomes an executioner. Ironically, the enthusiastic Shaughnessy's traveled to the ends of the earth to bring home a criminal. It is a pity that they, enamored with love for the child, could not convey to their son the simple truth of life that money is the most easily replenishable resource, but time, unfortunately, is not. In an interview Nicholas gave from prison, he sincerely apologizes to his mother. But is it possible to accept an apology that shouldn't be there in the first place? Throughout the years of investigation, Corey Shaughnessy has endured an incredible emotional journey to the realization that her own son hired hitmen to take her and her husband's lives for money. And she still loves her son, the same 8-year-old boy who lovingly hugs her in photos and races cars with his father. But that boy is gone forever, and so is the life Corey and Ted tried to build around him. Corey Shaughnessy currently lives in another state under an assumed name, and every day that passes she tries to find faith again in the people around her. Indeed, many people are far from what they appear to be at first glance. A chilling thought visits us throughout our story. The two people who tried to kill you were living with you in your own home. Take a good look around you. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.